Yo, what is good, duelist? We have another video today. I've made a small list of what cards I think are good versus every matchup. So this will be tech specific. So we're going to be going over cards that I think, if you're playing at your local and maybe you have more of this deck rather than this deck, these are the tech cards I would include. So I'm not going to say simple things like Ash Blossom is good versus, like Despia, Labyrinth, because that's kind of obvious, and we already play those cards, and you should probably know that already. It's going to be more tech specific cards, so that's why the title's 30 or 5 best techs. I don't know. It's not really going to be it's going to be X number for whichever deck, depending on how many cards I think are actually utilized versus those decks. Yeah, so let's get into it. So we're going to be going over a lot of decks. The first deck I want to go over is actually Unchained. So what cards do I think are best versus Unchained is kind of what sparked my idea for this video, because I think Unchained is a really interesting deck with how many cards aren't good versus it that have been there's not much overlap, especially with these cards in the current meta, because not many cards specifically hit Unchained. So the first card is actually going to be Nibiru. I think Nibiru is like one of the best cards versus Unchained. They're typically going to summon more than 5 times, so I would always include it there. Dimension Shifter is another great card if you can play it. Some decks are kind of hybrid in that way where, Purrley can get away with playing it. Kashtira, we're obviously going to play it, but D-Shifter definitely hits Unchained really hard. Going first, cards like Cosmic Cyclone can be a good one for one that you're probably already playing. You can set it. I would wait until they actually activate a guy so you get, the hard once per turn out the way, and as well as getting rid of a card. So it's kind of like a +1. It's like a pseudo +1 because you're getting rid of a hard once per turn effect and a card at the same time. I think Deck Lockdown is actually a tremendous card that I haven't seen many people talk about. Deck Lockdown prevents all of their Lone Fire Blossom effects because they can't actually special summon from the main deck. It affects you too, and it's also a mistake in that way. Neither player can add deck cards from their deck to their hand. It's a really good effect. Definitely going to be talking about that with these other decks as well. Bestial Magnamut is a okay card. Same with DD Crow. You usually use it on Yuma. It's really any Bestials. You can play Druis Worm or whatever you want. But Magnamut's obviously the supreme one. And then if they're doing the Griffin combo, so it's kind of like 50-50 with that. If they are ending on Nightmare Griffin, like I just saw that 20 SMR dude is insane. He actually does the Nightmare Griffin lock. So if they are doing that, Evenly actually gets some points. If they're not, Evenly I don't think is very good. And then obviously the cards like Book of Eclipse and Book of Moon, these cards go up in value if your deck loses to DDD Rukalos, because obviously we can set that XYZ, and then it's kind of like a +1 because that guy's not once per turn at all. So he would have negated 2 things, right? And then if you are playing the Unchained Mirror, I think Unchained Soul of Disaster is worth including in your side just for the mirror match. It's pretty good. And then next deck, the top 5 cards versus Labyrinth. We're going to be we're going over the obvious one, which is Bell. Evenly is also a pretty good card because it's just removal. Now cards like Cosmic Cyclone, I definitely see people use Cosmic too early. So we want to use Cosmic either as a chain block for the one effect, the Labyrinth 3K guy. We want to chain block that, or we want to save it for their Floodgate. We don't really want to take the blind 50-50s versus deck, because why not just use it on the Floodgate? Or if your deck your deck's weak to D barrier, that's just a +1 for them, right? And then obviously like a card like Feather Duster is very good as well. And also, I would keep the books in. I think books are actually underrated versus deck. They're good for the chain block as well. Any quick play really is going to be good for chain blocking versus this deck. And then we'll go on to the next deck. So Manadium. Manadium has fallen off a lot, but it's pretty simple. So this deck isn't really played that much anymore, but the cards that are good on it really depend on the strategy they're doing. So if they're doing Calamity FTK, obviously a card like Dark Ruler No More isn't going to be good. If they're not doing Calamity FTK, Dark Ruler goes up in value. It really just depends on the strategy they're using. A card like Droll Knockbird going to be insane versus the deck. That's why everyone mained this card at the start of the format. And then, just the basic hand traps are going to be good. Mourner, Effect Veiler, Imperm, right? And then now we are on Kashtira. So Kashtira is a very, I think it's less played now, and it's probably going to get hit on the list. So how much good is this for you? But it does have some pretty specific cards that are very good against it. Overpowered, I would say. I'd say Triple Tactics Talents is one of the best cards versus Kashtira. Now, obviously, going first, it's a good card too. It's kind of like I'll use Pseudo again. Pseudo Engine going first because if you want just like the maximum amount of engine, we're always siding in talents going first because it's kind of more engine and can help us with bricky hands. If we do get hand trapped and our play gets stopped and it's not imperm. But talents going second is just like playing as cash and playing versus cash. If I have talents or if my opponent has talents, I think I'm losing the game. Like my whole plays revolve around trying to play around that card. Obviously, if you have a Rise Heart, it's going to be very difficult to play around talents, and they can just Zeus you. Which is insane. I mean, if I'm playing Purrley and I get talents going second, it's wraps, right? Kurikara is also a very good card versus cash. It's definitely not seeing as much play because it doesn't have the overlap it used to have, but I think Kurikara is worth including, and it might get better. You know, when the Sinful Spoils cards come out, it is a level 1 fire, so it has some practicality with that as well. Now, Anti-Spell Fragrance, I think is also a very good card going first, along with Erad. The deck's like half spells, so these cards are very good versus the deck. And then going second, XYZ Encore actually has some overlap, obviously with Purrley. It's a really good card. Now, the interesting thing about this with Kashtira against a Rise Heart, these cards get banished versus Rise Heart because it detaches the materials first. And then if you see here, it says monster card in the graveyard among those detached XYZ materials. So those cards won't get special summoned from the banish zone when they're banished from a Rise Heart, and it still works. So XYZ Encore is actually not that bad of a card versus Kashtira. And then we have Contact C. This is if you're already like gambling with this card versus Purrley. I think Contact C is definitely worth sliding in versus Kashtira. Alright, now we're going on to what cards are good versus Purrley. So the obvious cards are going to be D-Barrier. This card's just game. The Contact C, we just went over. It's kind of like a gamble. XYZ Encore, definitely a very good card versus Purrley, I would say. Book of Eclipse and Book of Moon. Book of Eclipse is better because we can use it in the draw phase if their monster has 3 materials or less, because they can't actually yeep, or their Noir will go face down immediately. But if it does have 4 materials, it won't, because it will be unaffected. And it's also worse in a way where it loses to Ash Blossom, but that's like a 33% chance they have it and you have it. Now, obviously, if you're giving them like 2 to 3 draws, because they have enough materials where you can't book the Eclipse and draw phase, it's going to get worse. They're more likely to draw Ash out of their deck, and that's what really sucks about it, and that's where Book of Moon kind of gets a little better. Or like a card like Herald of the Abyss can be insane as well. But, you know, they're drawing all those cards if you're playing a normal spell card. So that's kind of the downfall of the card. And then we have King Tiger Wengu for going first. This card's really good. The Chimera deck can search it. The Purrley deck really just can't play through this card at all. Deck Lockdown, again, another card with overlap versus this deck. I think it's actually really good versus the Purrley deck. And then we're on to Chimera. So Chimera is an interesting deck. There's actually not that many specific cards, but obviously D-Barrier is going to be game going first. Anti-Spell is another good card going first. Deck Lockdown, I think, is a tremendous card going first. Their Night Guy is kind of like a Lone Fire Blossom. He won't work. All their cards add from the deck to their hand. They're like Shaddolls. So Deck Lockdown is actually pretty powerful versus that deck too. With a card like Evenly Match, I would say I wouldn't side this card versus the deck, but I would bluff the battle phase a lot versus this deck because they can overcommit sometimes because they don't want to lose to the Evenly Match if you did side it in. Obviously, that's going to trend downward with them playing around it as they catch on to that bluff. But especially if it's your only chance in winning, you might as well do it. Definitely something I picked up from Master Duel, bluffing evenly a lot during that World's Grind. And Retaliating Sea and Dimension Shifter are also extremely good cards versus this deck. They really just shut them down. They need to use their graveyard to get the effects. So these 2 cards are just game. And besides that, really just effect negates are what you want to see versus this deck. Alright, now going on to Rescue Ace. So Rescue Ace, cards like Lightning Storm, Feather Duster, They're going to be really good. Cosmic Cyclone, of course. Cosmic Cyclone, you're usually going to use on the blind set. This deck sides in Solemn Judgment a lot. So if you have a lot of back row decks at your locals, I would definitely side in like Cosmic Cyclone with Storms and Harpy's Feather Duster. You might need all of them. And hopefully you draw a Cosmic Cyclone with the Feather Duster in your hand just in case they do have that Solemn Judgment. Obviously these are very improbable scenarios, but they do happen. And then Evenly Matched, also a very good card. They set 4, if they don't have Solemn, Evenly Matched is going to get you a +4, at least, right? And then Nibiru is actually pretty good. If they're pro, it's not that good if they're playing around it and aware of it the whole time. But a deck like this really needs to kill you. But I think, especially in a deck like Purrley, Nibiru can be really strong. Now, what you really want to prevent if you're playing a deck like Purrley is them getting the IP to go into Unicorn to bounce your field spell, because your field spell is just like the ultimate win con for the Purrley versus Rescue Ace matchup. The field spell is just the nuts. So if they're making the IP and trying to go into Unicorn to get rid of your field spell, we're trying to prevent that, right? And we're also trying to get we don't want to get killed on turn 3, so that's some turn 3 potential as well versus the deck. And then I also think Deck Lockdown, again, going first, is very strong versus the Rescue Ace deck. Magic Deflector is an okay card. Summon Limit, also a very good card versus this deck. You just use it on their second summon, and usually that's game. Salamangreat, I've been seeing a good amount on DB. The cards that are good versus this, I would say Nib, especially has overlap with a lot of decks we've mentioned now. Now, at the start of the format, I didn't think Nib was very good. Now I think it's the Stones again. D-Shifter, Shotgun is insane versus, because of talents, I would just shotgun it. Imperm, Mourner, they're pretty good. I would use them on Salamangreat of Fire or Splash Mage, depending on the situation. But I would not use it on the Baylynx or Gazelle. So I would pretty much only use it on the prior cards mentioned. Cosmic Cyclone can be a very good card. Obviously, they have the Counter Trap. And then there can only be one is a very good Floodgate versus this deck going first. Now, that is pretty much most of the decks I wanted to run through. Obviously, Dragon Link and stuff. There's a lot of decks being played this format, so it's hard to include them all. If you wanted me to go over a deck that I missed, just let me know. I'm sorry if I missed the deck that's destroying you at locals. But beyond that, have a great day.